Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, the stars of the Sydney Writers' Festival. Theoretical physicist Lawrence Krauss, whose new book tells the greatest story ever told so far. Journalist Niki Savva, whose book Road to Ruin on Tony Abbott was a bestseller. The Booker Prize-winning author of The Sellout, Paul Beatty. Data-crunching, tech-savvy, myth-busting, video-making modern journalist Mona Chalabi. And a Russian author who takes readers inside Putin's inner circle, Mikhail Zygar. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. Now, Q&A is live on ABC TV in Eastern Australia. It's live everywhere else on the ABC News channel at 9:35 Eastern Standard Time. And you can watch and listen live on iView, YouTube, Facebook, ABC News Radio, and of all things, Periscope. Our first question comes from Natalie Blanket.
18 different publishers turned down The Sellout until One World agreed to publish your book. Being that it's a story where the protagonist reintroduces slavery and segregation and the tone hyperbolizes African-American culture to the extreme, perhaps publishers felt uncomfortable or even a bit scared to distribute such racially charged content under their name, despite it clearly being a work of satire. Do you feel this new wave of political correctness and cultural sensitivity we're experiencing is coming at the cost of freedom of expression, creative and otherwise?
Paul Beatty, welcome to Australia.
Yes. No, I don't know. I don't think it's like a new wave of political correctness. I mean, people have been censoring and castigating each other for a long time. You know, it's not new. And I think part of the problem is that we always try to recast this as new, like everything is new. I think maybe one of the reasons for that book is, I think that book hopefully kind of exposes how old this is, how ceaseless all this kind of stuff is, and just how uncomfortable we've always been talking about these things. And yeah, I don't think it's new, really, I don't. It's
pretty challenging. 18 publishers, for some reason, didn't find out how brilliant it was, or didn't realise how brilliant it was.
Yeah.
Do you think they were challenged by the racially charged content, as the questioner suggests? I mean, for example, the euphemistic N-word is sprinkled liberally throughout the book.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't publish a book because some one word isn't, that's a terrible reason not to publish a book. Yeah. I was talking to a student of mine, I don't know why this pops in my head. We were talking about this black comedian, and he goes, and I was out, do you think he's funny? And he goes, yeah, he's funny. And I was like, why? And he goes, oh, because he doesn't talk about race. I was like, that's the reason he's not funny, or that he's funny. It's just so weird. I don't know, but I was lucky. I think because the people that published the book in the UK, One World, they turned the book down also, And I was fortunate enough that a book editor at one of the bigger papers in London was like, I can't believe no one's published this book. So I don't answer why they did it, and it's not my business, really,
Yeah, bad business decision on their part, obviously. Paul, can you just explain for anyone who hasn't read The Sellout, just how it comes to pass that your protagonist ends up, and he's a black American or African American, whichever you prefer, he ends up owning a slave and trying to bring segregation back to his own neighbourhood. Tell us how that transpires.
His neighbourhood, this place called Dickens, kind of is erased off the map, because it's kind of a blight in California, as the dream state, and LA is the paradise of paradise, I guess. And so he just tries to think of ways to resurrect the community. And so he doesn't, it's not like he buys a slave. A guy just kind of declares himself as his slave. He's got like a shtick that, true freedom is the right to be a slave if you want to be, and that's a weird conundrum that he's trying to piece out. And one of the things he's doing is like, he lives in this place and he goes, nothing's worked. He hears this kind of, Trump is make America great again. I think like, in the States, there's some...
I just love the idea, make America great again, bring back segregation.
Yeah, I mean, but I think that's part of in Trump's thing, It's, the wall. I mean, it's kind of...
Attorney General that wants to do that too, I think.
Say that?
We have an Attorney General that's big on that.
Yeah, and So he kind of comes up with the way. For me, it was fun to kind of recast. Segregation's not a word that gets tossed around, even though it's a construct that does exist. And for me, it was interesting to recast the idea of racial segregation in a contemporary context, you know, and it's just as a way of just drawing lines around this community.
Well, we'll come back to more of that in a while, but just very briefly, the questioner referred to it as satire. You don't use that term, do you?
No, I don't. It's just how I write. And the book, you know, tonally is no different than anything else I've written, but the word satire has come up a lot with this book. My sense is it's kind of a way of not having to really talk about the book, to make the book feel kind of not so much accessible, but safe in a weird way. Oh, it's satire, ha ha ha, you know? I don't have to really, you know, I get to laugh and not think, but hopefully the book is bigger than whatever people feel about satire, you know? Because I think it's a word that you can hide behind.
I want to take another question, and then we'll bring in our other panellists. We've got a question from Dante Winbush. Hi, Dante.
Yes, I do have a question here. They gave me this card, and the wording is so small I can barely see the card. So I have my own version here. And to the producers of the show, this is not the X-rated versions. It's exactly same, identical. So I'll read it from here. As an African-American and a college graduate that has lived in Australia for 22 years, I quite often deal with racism and discrimination on a regular basis, especially in my profession, and I can elaborate on that a little later if you'd like, especially in my line of work. Now, some of it is institutionalized, some of it is hidden, and some of it is blatantly in your face. When it's really serious, I go through the proper channels, obviously, to try to complain about it. But often I find that when I do this, the people that I take my complaints to often look and act exactly like the people that I'm complaining about. So it is not as easy as it sounds. My question is for Paul and Mona and any other the members on the board who'd like to jump in on this, but just be very careful. In writing about racism and discrimination and injustice and police brutality, and the list goes on, do you find that when discussing and or writing about these topics, that your presentation is much more likely to be absorbed by your audience if you put a humorous spin on them, or if you take a more serious approach and a direct approach to these topics?
Okay, I'm going to start with Mona, because the question is directed to both of you, but we'll hear from the rest of the panel as well. But you go ahead first.
So as a data journalist, I very often focus on numbers to talk about these kind of topics, and I find that it can be quite effective. But I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because I don't think you necessarily need to present numbers to make the case that racism exists. You mentioned really insidious things that are very difficult to quantify, and it kind of creates this very difficult debate where some people will say things like, oh, it's all in your head, whereas, you know, some of this stuff is very, very difficult to demonstrate. Having said that, I do think statistics are really important, and I think that the Trump administration might agree with me, because at the moment they're trying to undermine some of the national statistics that exist. So shortly after the inauguration, there's a Republican bill in Congress at the moment which says that federal money should not be used to collect data on racial segregation. This is a really, really frightening move, because it basically means that if we don't have data on racial injustice, the administration can make the case that it just doesn't exist. So I think that, I'm not sure if I'm actually answering your question at all, but I think that actually data is really, really important for this stuff. It obviously isn't everything, and you don't need to present data to make the case that racial injustice exists, but data is important.
Now, Paul, I'll come back to you. Listening to the question, a compatriot, I suppose, has asked this. Obviously, he's suggesting there's racism in Australia. We'll come back to him on that in a moment, but the notion...
Sorry.
It does seem like you're making the case that it's good to use humour to combat racism.
Yes.
There, Dante. We'll come back to you.
Okay.
So what do you think? I mean, obviously you've chosen to use humour or satire or whatever you choose to call it.
I've chosen to write, you know, and the humor is just a part of the way I see things, you know, I guess. You know, sometimes people ask me, the book is funny, this and that. And I go, yeah, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's not. You know, like I'll read a passage to one audience and they'll be cracking up. I'll read the same passage and they're still engaged, but they're not laughing. You know, it's the mood I'm in, the mood they're in, who's sitting next to whom, you know. So the humor thing is not a tool, you know, that for me, humor's everywhere. It's in so many things. And just the word funny. Funny means so many different things, you know? And I'm one of those people who finds like everything funny at some level.
Lawrence, what do you think?
Well, you know, it's interesting to hear you say that because I think any difficult topic, when you introduce humor, makes it more accessible. People relax you know, obviously with science, which is another barrier-ridden field, if you use humor, people just are less intimidated. So I think it's an essential part of the world, viewing, as you say, it's your worldview. And for me, it's the same thing. I think we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. In fact, I was just thinking about the 18 publishers. You shouldn't take publishers too seriously because it's obvious. The real reason it didn't get picked by 18 publishers is publishers aren't very smart. I know my publisher's here, but nevertheless. So I think, anyway, I think that this issue...
Does it work for racism, anti-Semitism, and all sorts of discrimination?
Because it forces you to think about things in a different way. And really, that's what you want. If you want to get people thinking, then presenting something which maybe doesn't seem very funny as humorous gets people thinking about it. And really, the purpose is to get, at least I think the purpose of literature as well as science is to get people thinking about themselves and their place in the universe. And it's also the purpose of data, because data is often surprising, because we have these views, these senses of how things are, and they're often very, very wrong. And it's really, and you know, what you said about racism, the Trump administration is trying to get rid of data in all sorts of areas, as you know, in science in particular, in the environment.
We will definitely come to that question. Niki, not a lot of humour in The Road to Ruin, but he could have made a brilliant satire.
Well, and hopefully still will.
Yeah.
But look, just on the satire and the way that your book has been cast, that sort of makes me think that it's a way for people to avoid, you know, the serious subject of it. That, OK, you know, it's funny and it's light and maybe you don't have to think about it as much as you otherwise would. It could be a way of saying, oh, yeah, well, that was pretty funny, but, you know, we won't think about it too deeply.
Yeah,
Is that something that worries you?
Yeah, it's not so much about the book, it's more about me, you know? I don't want to be the satirist. It's such a tight box, you know? And I just want to write, and I don't want to get old like Mark Twain and like have to do a tour circuit of being witty, you know, and wear a seersucker suit. You know, I just...
And have to be funny about it all the time.
Yeah.
Paul, I read somewhere that when you were studying psychology, you'd hear people say, this is racist, that is racist, this is racist, and you got to a point where you thought, I don't even know what the word means anymore. I mean, you don't really mean that, do you?
Oh, I totally do. I never know what anything means. So, I mean, that's, you know, part of the joy I have in writing is just trying to figure out what things mean. I don't have to need it. I mean, we're on Q&A. It's the Q's for me that are really interesting. I don't think there are very many A's, you know?
Yeah, the Q's are, that's the central part. Get questions.
Yeah.
Those are the neat things.
Well, we quite like the A's. That's why the panellists are here.
No, but I mean, this is like, I think people feel like they need A's. You know, and you can get a long place by pretending that you have some A. I can't believe I'm using A.
Well, let's leave the A word aside. Yeah, I've also seen you talk about when the Ku Klux Klan leader David Duke, back in '91, ran for governor of Louisiana. And I think you point out that 65% of white voters voted for David Duke, a KKK leader. But 3% of his vote came from black people. Was that part of the inspiration for having such a sort of strange idea behind your book?
No, that had nothing to do with that. But that's a good friend. I feel like I was talking about that because people were talking about Trump. And, you know, I don't have, like, any A's about Trump. But, you know, one of the things was, I think...
about him.
What's that?
There's a lot of Q's about him. But...
Yeah. Queasiness. But, you know, it was... You know, I think there's a thing of white self-hatred in a weird way that people don't really talk about. And for me, it was very familiar or similar in my head about why black people would vote for a guy who was the head of the Ku Klux Klan. It's like this notion of when you're voting or when you're acting against your own self-interests. And what's that about? And so it has nothing to do with the book, and maybe in some ways...
And there's a parallel right now as well, because you hear a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment from immigrants in places. And it's because, actually, because of the anti-immigrant sentiment around them, actually there's a real desire to double down, because it's the entry of more immigrants that threatens the immigrants that are already here.
Last one in, close the door.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's because, actually, there's a fallacy over here as well, that immigrants are competing with native-born Australians for jobs. But actually, in terms of the job market, people are working in very different sectors. And actually, when immigrants come in, they threaten the jobs of existing immigrants. So there is a real desire to close the door. And it doesn't make any sense because, I mean, it's just hypocritical, but it doesn't stop people from just wanting to protect themselves.
Let me bring Mikhail in now. There's a huge tradition of satire in Russia. I mean, does it work in the case of talking about President Putin, or could you find yourself disappearing?
We know for
if you were too funny.
For 5 years, when I was running the only independent news TV channel in Russia, that is called TV Rain, we were dreaming of just let's launch the real comedy TV show that could like make fun of Putin, with presenters who could joke about Russian politics. And you know, that is really important to have that show, because you can make very serious investigations. You can make very good news TV channel and cover all the most important things live. But that's very hard to make a decent comedy show. And actually, we failed. We could not, for 5 years, we could not start really funny TV show because all the most humorous men and women in Russia were afraid to joke about. I'm not sure. Probably not. Probably if there is a tradition that Russian society probably is so much polarized. So there is a huge amount of people who strongly oppose President Putin, and they cannot joke about him and being funny. They hate him so much. So that sounds weird for a lot of people who are just neutral. So that's much harder to make decent satire if you live if you want to joke about a problem that really disturbs you, that is really that could be really dangerous for your life. So unfortunately, I can say that there is almost no political satire in today's Russia.
You're saying the reason is fear?
Not because of that's not a threat. There is no danger that you're going to be prosecuted, or you're going to be. You can lose your job if you're really funny. If a lot of people just love your jokes, you can lose your job. So, but you've got an option. You can look for a job at the mainstream nationwide TV channels, and you would always prefer that. If you know that you can earn a lot of money as very popular comedy actor, satirist, you would definitely prefer that. So the space for satire and humor is much lower than for independent journalism.
I'm going to quickly, sorry to interrupt you there, Mikhail. I'm just going to quickly go back to our questioner who got us started on this question of racism specifically. Are you actually making the case that you've suffered racism regularly in Australia?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank the panel for being here. It's a fascinating panel. You guys are fascinating, and I don't want to make this topic exclusively about racism and discrimination, because I think Professor Straussman, he did a seminar presentation in Geneva on Feynman, Quantum Man, and I thought that was fascinating. And physics isn't even my forte, so I just want to applaud you on that. That was fantastic. I actually, my line of work is I run a comedy club in Sydney, and I have for the last 10 years. And over that 10 years, I've experienced a lot of discrimination, a lot of racism. I'll give you a point at hand. There's a percentage of comics that perform in Australia and Sydney that won't play in my room because it's controlled and run by an African American. And to take that even further, there's club owners who have clubs in Sydney who tell some comics that if they play in my room, they won't play in their rooms. Wow. And this has been going on for 10 years, a long time. But on a lighter note, there are a lot of positive comedians and a lot of positive people that support me, support the room, support what I do, and they enabled me to keep this room going 10 years running.
We'll let you come on the panel on another occasion.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm going to take that as a comment because I get the chance to say that. We'll move on to our next question. It's from Lynn Shivor.
Professor Krauss, we only know about 5% of the observable universe that are atoms, the rest being dark matter and dark energy, and the unknown invisible force that binds it all. As you are an atheist and believe that we are here by accident, can it be possible that the unknown is a form of the divine or life force?
Wow, okay. First of all, I used a word that I don't use. Scientists should never use the word believe. In science, things are either likely or unlikely. But belief is just doesn't come into it, okay? It just doesn't come in at all. So the thing about dark matter and dark energy is they're weird, they're strange, but they're not supernatural. They obey laws of physics. And we learn about the universe by trying to understand how they behave. And in fact, they are responsible for us being here. These invisible things are responsible for us being here. But unlike God, first of all, they actually exist. And secondly, they actually allow us to make predictions about what's going to happen next and test those ideas. And so it's really important that even dark energy, which is the weirdest thing in the world, which is the energy of empty space, that empty space weighs something as crazy as it can be, allows us to make predictions that we can test. And so, in a sense, you can think of it as divine in the sense of Einstein's God, Spinoza. The idea that Einstein used to talk about God, he really didn't mean God, but he talked about the fact that there was order in the universe, and he called it Spinoza's God, and the idea that somehow the universe is comprehensible, that it's ordered, that it's wonderful, that it's awe-inspiring. In that sense, I think that's true. And I see great spirituality, if you want to use that word, when I look at a Hubble Space Telescope picture. But as I often say, the spirituality of science is just better than the spirituality of religion because it's real.
Lawrence, Einstein also said that the God problem is the most difficult in the world. It's one that our limited minds can't comprehend. So I suppose going back to the questioner, you can't disprove the existence of God.
Absolutely
with
cannot
science,
disprove
can you?
No, absolutely cannot disprove the existence of God, nor can I disprove that there's a China teapot orbiting Jupiter. But, which is not from me, that's from Bertrand Russell. But
if there was a God, would Trump be president, do you think?
Well, actually, the only times I've ever believed in God is when something bad happens to me, because I think I deserve it. So, you know, I think you could argue that that's an argument against God, but you can't ever disprove this notion, but it's a vague notion. What you can disprove are these ridiculous claims that the scriptures are based on, you know, that the earth, that some blew a horn and in fact the sun didn't stop in the sky because the earth, at the time they thought the sun went around the earth. I mean, so it amazes me that people take these ancient books, and that's why I call it the greatest story ever told so far, because the real story gets better all the time. The old greatest story ever told is still the same, just as wrong and just as boring 2,000 years later.
Hey, Paul, do you believe in God?
I don't.
No.
No. But I think it's interesting, like you were using God as like some, you know, gatekeeper to prevent the Trumps or whatever of the world.
Well, isn't that why he's there, if he's there?
I mean,
Well, isn't that good evidence that, you know, that he's not? I mean, if you...
No, you know what it is, though? There's a really good book, a really good biography. I can't think of the author's name. It's called Explaining Hitler. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about the Holocaust, and he talks to these rabbis about, you know, what happened, does that test your faith in God? And I remember this one guy says that, no, I never lost my belief in God, but I had to question how powerful God was. I love that. That was so smart. You know, for him, I don't believe in God, but it's this thing, you know, this idea of what God's supposed to do.
There are limits.
But yeah.
But that's why you know, on another TV program this week, I got asked about whether I was an atheist or an anti-theist, and I said, I'm an apatheist. Because, no, and it sounds funny, but it's true, because I don't give a damn. It doesn't matter. I've been a scientist for 40 years, and the word never comes up. If you're trying to understand how the world works, God is completely irrelevant.
Let me ask, is God completely irrelevant in Putin's Russia?
Oh, for me, that's just continuation of the first topic. About 2 weeks ago, a video blogger in his 20s was accused of being atheist, and he was sentenced to he faced up to 3 years in jail for playing Pokemon Go in the Orthodox Church, and he was convicted only for he was charged for disrespect, insult of the feelings of the believers. Mm-hmm. So according to the current Russian laws, that's illegal to say everything you're saying, actually, because you might insult some people who truly believe in God, and that reminds me something from your book. That's in today's Russia, it looks like that jokes about God and public demonstration that you are atheist is something that is, if not illegal, but is weird. Mm. Because,
by the way, did nothing happen to the company that put a Pokemon in the church?
Not yet, but I think there should be an investigation at least.
Don't you find it weird though that they never worry about insulting the views of non-believers, and somehow the freedom to oppress is a central part of religion.
Huge debate in Russia, and a lot of people who do not believe. They want Russian parliament to introduce the new law and just to protect their feelings as well as
because freedom of religion is freedom from religion.
Those who believe in different monsters and other creatures also want their feelings to be protected.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, guys, we're going to move on. We've got a question from Ian Casimir.
With the current hostility displayed to inconvenient science by the Trump administration and the cutback in funding for general research by a number of conservative governments, is the West in danger of losing its lead in scientific and technological innovation to other nations that don't have such political and religious baggage?
Lawrence Krauss, you can stick with the Trump administration for a moment because you've written about it in The New Yorker. But let's pick up...
But I think it happens generally. It's happening here, too. I think it's a real problem that you're seeing not only reduction in support of research, but a real problem relates to what was talked about earlier, immigration. You're seeing it in this country with a proposed budget with these visas that are going to stop talented people from coming into the country. And it is absolutely true that governments always blame immigrants for taking jobs from people. What they do is they take the jobs that local people wouldn't take. But you're seeing governments wanting to keep the best young people in the world out of their country. And the United States, its primacy in science has depended on the fact that it always opened its doors to the best young people in the world who came to study at its universities, some of whom went back, and that helps the world anyway, but many of whom created Google or wherever else in the country. And so you are seeing the third world and China realizing what was well known before in the first world, which is that to gain an economic prominence, especially in the 21st century, to become an economic powerhouse, you want to be a technological powerhouse. And you're seeing fundamental devotion of money to research in South Korea and China. And I have every expectation that we are doing as much as we can to quickly move to the back of the pack. And that's all right for the world because the science will be done, but for the West it isn't.
Lawrence, we see that Trump is stepping back from some of his positions. Will he step back on I mean, he's obviously got within his administration people who are serious climate science deniers.
Yes,
but will he step back from it as he stepped back from other things?
Well, he doesn't have any views. He just says whatever the heck he's thinking about. I mean, to suggest there's some reason behind anything he says is to assume so much more to the man. No, I mean, there was a great article in the New York Times saying, that felt it was an insult to 4-year-olds when people compared Trump to 4-year-olds. And it wasn't just funny because 4-year-olds are curious, they're intellectually curious, they're playful, they experiment, they want to know more about the world, and he doesn't do any of that. So I think that you are seeing right now, I think the one area where there's great consistency, because he has surrounded himself with, he doesn't care, but he's surrounded himself with people who care nothing about the environment, who basically have legislated or worked against legislation on the environment. And as far as climate change is concerned, you know, there's a big debate about whether they're going to pull out of the Paris Accords. And I suspect there'll be enough peer pressures that they probably won't. But it won't matter, because the Paris Accords they're just sort of wish list. If you stay in there, but then choose to not take any actions anyway, and try and, as this country does, waste time, resources, and human lives on coal, then you're effectively obviating the Paris Accords anyway.
Let's just see if Niki will challenge that characterisation of this country.
Well, firstly, I don't think that even if he surrounded himself with people who were climate change believers, that he would take any notice of them anyway. So I think that...
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word believers again, but if he surrounded himself with scientists, he wouldn't take any...
He wouldn't take any notice. In Australia, you know, what we've seen, I think, in the last little while is that climate change has really drifted off the agenda.
Yeah.
Quite seriously, not just by the government, but by the Labor Party as well, which used to have it at the forefront of its policies. Last week, Bill Shorten, in his budget in reply speech, gave it one sentence. One.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be the lead. It used to have a carbon tax, which the rest of the world is going to have eventually.
It used to be the carbon tax, but what we had was, you know, a succession of leaders falling like skittles on this issue. One after the other was being destroyed over climate change. And I think one of the reasons why they have pulled back from that is to try and stabilise on that score, because I think there is fatigue building into the community on the issue of climate change. It is still right up there for a certain cohort, but for great masses of Australians, that has fallen way down the scale.
It's funny. I mean, I guess they hear that cohort, because people complain to me all the time about what's going to happen to the Great Barrier Reef when they waste $1 billion on coal. And you had a prime minister who once, I mean, Trump said some stupid things, but this guy said it's a shame for future generations to leave that coal in the ground, which is exactly the opposite. It's a shame for future generations to take that coal out of the ground.
I'm going to leave it there because we're going to go a bit deeper. We've got lots of questions we want to get to. Next one's from Ethan Ding. Ethan.
This question to Mona. Visualization of data can easily be manipulated to only showcase data you favor. So an increasing amount of so-called fact-based political campaigns these days actually carefully pick to support their own view under the cover of data and statistics. So how do you ensure that you are not only conducting research to support your own view?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. And it's related to what Niki was saying about several politicians in this country kind of falling over. And part of it is because of polling. And I think actually a lot of polling is very, very inaccurate. And it's inaccurate for a lot of different reasons. So in America, for example, if you ask Americans about their views on Obamacare, they might give you quite negative responses. If you ask them about their views on the Affordable Care Act, which is Obamacare, you might get very different responses. And so the wording of polling really, really matters. The other thing is that most polls include about 1,000 people, but there are 24 million people in this country. It's very difficult to get 1,000 people that are going to accurately represent the entire country, especially in a country that's becoming increasingly diverse. So polling is very, very inaccurate. But actually, my bigger issue of polling isn't necessarily even about its inaccuracies. It's about the effect that it has on democracy, which I think can be really, really toxic. In America, during the presidential campaign, I spoke to a lot of people who said, I would like to vote for Bernie Sanders, but, like, there's no point because he doesn't stand a chance, so I'm not going to bother voting for him. That's not the way democracy is supposed to work. It's not supposed to be about calculated decisions of hedging your bets. It's supposed to be about voting for the person whose values you agree with. So I think polls are really, really damaging. And I think the public all kind of has a role to play as well, because actually, again, in the lead up to the presidential election, people were relentlessly checking the polls because they just wanted to be told that everything was going to be OK and Trump wasn't going to be president. And so by relentlessly checking the polls and by becoming obsessed with them, actually a lot of journalists, including myself, were probably publishing too many pieces about the polls. So it's kind of a really, really toxic cycle.
What about the other part of the question, the distortion of data?
I think that's very fair as well. And it's good to kind of be aware of it. Yes, very often when I'm faced with a data set, I have choices I can make about how I'm going to interpret it. And this is why actually government statistics are really, really important and why I'm worried about what's happening in America, because actually government statisticians are civil servants who are in their roles regardless of who's in power, and they don't make those biased decisions. For example, the unemployment rate in the US is a methodology that's been in place for so long. It's protected so that it can't be influenced by things like that. Whereas private companies have private interests to say things like, use this skin cream and you're going to look great, 9 out of 10 women agree, you know?
I'm going to move on because we've got quite a few questions that we're not going to get a chance to get to otherwise. This one's from Stefan Dukic.
Thank you. Mr. Zygar, you have previously said that Trump is exactly the kind of partner that the Kremlin has wanted for years. Why do you believe this, and what are the chances that the two will clash due to their personalities?
You know, I've never thought that there are any real connections between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And
you mean no financial connections? Because
yes,
obviously that's what people want to know at this point. So you believe there's no corruption behind the scenes?
I really do not believe in any corruption schemes. And I'll start from something a bit different from than you ask. You know, when I'm listening to American media, when I'm watching like CNN documentary, The Most Powerful Man in the World, and that's about Vladimir Putin. When I see the latest cover of The Time with White House transforming itself into Kremlin, it reminds me a lot about the conspiracy theories I hear and I watch on Russian television. Because Russian TV is obsessed with conspiracy theory that there is CIA conspiracy behind the plan to dismantle Russia, to ruin the Russian state. There is a huge plot inspired by Americans, like to overthrow Vladimir Putin and so on. And
so, are you suggesting is it about the CIA influence in Georgia and Ukraine and those places?
That's the theory that Russian television says. If you change the word CIA for Putin, that's the new theory of mainstream American media. That's just the same conspiracy theory we've been watching for many years, and it's very new in the West. And I'm really surprised with all that. I don't want to say anything about Trump's idea about witch hunt, but most of those reports seem to me a bit inaccurate. But speaking about how Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump suit each other, yes, they suit each other a lot. For many years, Vladimir Putin was looking for a partner he could deal with. He hates when he's being lectured about human rights. He does not believe in all those liberal values, blah, blah, blah. He always thinks that he's cheated. He has been cheated by Barack Obama, by Angela Merkel. So he has always wanted to have a partner like Silvio Berlusconi.
He's found one.
A cynical, pragmatic guy. And you know, that's
isn't it, Mikhail? It's a bit worse than that, even, isn't it? Because apparently his favourite US president is actually a fictional character called Frank Underwood.
Yes. Yeah. No, I was really surprised when I've heard that for the first time, that he recommends his freshly appointed ministers to watch all the seasons of House of Cards, because you must know the enemy. That's how the American system works. You must watch it all, and just you're going to understand what we're facing. So he really believes that's all true, and he thinks that he could deal with Frank Underwood. So that's why he can deal with Donald Trump. Absolutely.
I'm going to bring in Paul. What do you think about this Vladimir Putin that we're hearing about here, who would quite like to have a relationship with a fictional US president from a House of Cards, and maybe thinks that Donald Trump is kind of similar?
I don't know. What Mikhail is saying is kind of, I mean, it's older than just now. I mean, in psychology, there's a theory called the mirror hypothesis, which is when people are on these two antipodal extremes, and you ask them separately, what do you think about them? What do you think about those people? Their answers mirror exactly, you know? And so it's this is just age old, you know, recast now because of what's happening in the States, and Putin. So that's really interesting to hear you say that,
But I worry about putting Putin and Trump on the same pedal. Putin is a strategic guy. He thinks. Well, he
strategic guy. Oh, please.
Well, he thinks
Russia
about.
hasn't got a strategy in economy, in domestic policy,
I'm talking about
in
strategic
foreign
in
policy.
terms of power. You don't think he's strategic in terms of power?
No.
He's done a good job of maintaining it.
I'm sure.
Oh, interesting.
So, I mean, it wasn't by accident, Mikhail, that he managed to take the Crimea, that he has organised destabilisation of the Ukraine, that the same thing is happening in the Baltic states, since they became members of NATO.
I mean, that's all different things. He had a plan. Not
a plan. That's an interesting.
About Crimea. For the first time, the idea of annexation of Crimea turned up in Kremlin in December 2013, 3 months ahead of the annexation. That's strategical thinking.
By comparison to what's happening,
that's like saying Trump had a plan. His plan was, I'm going to run for president.
Yeah,
he had no plan.
Yeah, exactly. 3 months before, having something 3 months of thought is so much more of a plan than anything we're seeing in the United States.
For the first decade of his presidency, Putin was telling during every internal meeting in Kremlin administration that we must do something about Ukraine, otherwise we're going to lose it. That's his quotation.
Well, he also tried to join NATO,
yes,
which was
in the beginning.
Was it a mistake to stop him from doing that?
He didn't want to lose Ukraine, but not to take one little piece of it and just to become hated by the whole nation. He really wanted to feel respected. He wanted Russia to become part of NATO and to be invited to NATO. He asked ex-Secretary General Lord Robertson, and he got the answer, there is certain procedure, just fill the application form and stand in a line after Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. They have already applied. He felt humiliated, and that feeling of being humiliated when you're president of like ex-Russian Empire is not the best feeling. That spoiled his psychology. He really wanted to be treated as an equal partner. He felt that he is neglected, and now his mission is accomplished. Now he's great. He's considered to make Russia great again, and he is considered to be a great leader.
Okay, well, I'm going to pause you there because we've got another question on this topic, and before you jump into it, I'll go to Thomas Hodgson.
Mr. Zygar, in your recent book, All the Kremlin's Men, you painted the picture of Vladimir Putin as a weary leader who painfully constructs an image of a strong man set to lead the nation. In your experience as a member of the Russian media, to what extent will he go to protect that image?
Russian government has almost all the media under its control. There wasn't a strategy to exterminate all the independent media, but it happened accidentally. First, after he became a president, he decided that he doesn't like one oligarch who owns one TV channel, and it's better just to take the TV channel away. And it became better. And he felt that the taste of a revenge against the enemy. And then, step by step, it was a long way. Now we don't have any independent. We almost don't have independent TV channels. We have no statistics. That's very important.
Well, you have. Can I just interrupt? You do have one statistic that Putin's people keep talking about, which is 86% popularity.
Everyone is talking about that. All the foreign media. Yeah. No, we don't have statistics. You're
saying they're made up, those statistics?
Officially, 86% approve of Mr. Putin, but as I don't know how it happens in your countries, when landline phone is ringing and you pick up the receiver. That means that you are at home during the daytime and you're asked, are you Mikhail Viktorovich Zygar, and you were born 31st of January, blah, 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 and your passport number is... And then you stand up and you know that everything that you say is recorded and they know who you are. And just that number we've got.
Pay attention, Malcolm Turnbull.
That number we've got means that at least 14% dared to confess they don't like Mr. Putin.
But let's bring it. I want to bring Mona's obviously burning to jump in here.
Well, I was just going to say, when you're describing the way that the media in Russia has evolved, isn't the moral of the story to not underestimate these men? Like, when you talk about Trump not having a plan, I think there's a difference maybe between having no logic to your actions and not having a plan. Like, isn't part of Trump's plan just personal enrichment?
That's the only plan.
That is a big part of everything that he does. And I think part of the reason why we've ended up where we've ended up is because he was just a figure of ridicule. No one took him seriously. And even still now, everyone's just sitting here and just waiting for an impeachment. Like, we need to take these men very, very seriously.
And, Lawrence, if what we're hearing over here from the Russian side of the fence is correct, the impeachment's a very long way off because apparently there's no evidence. There's going to be no corruption at the end of the trial.
That's the amazing thing is that the impeachment isn't going to have anything to do with Russia in the end. It's going to be Trump talking about things that Trump has throughout his whole life has survived being able to cheat and lie with impunity as a real estate developer. Now, and he was able to win the presidency doing exactly the same thing. But actually, it's a microscope when you're in the presidency, and he can't keep his mouth shut. And when he says, as he apparently said to the Russian ambassadors, you know what, I've just got rid of the FBI director, and it's going to relieve a lot of pressure on me. That's obstruction of justice. That's the kind of thing that's going to get him removed.
And when he says to the very same FBI director, can you please go soft on this investigation?
Yeah, and will you be loyal?
Sorry,
and all these things.
Can I ask one question for my American colleagues? Do you really believe that Donald Trump could be impeached for his Russian connections?
Hang on, Bob. I want to hear from Paul. I mean, I don't know how closely you follow politics in your own country, but what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, it's, having a plan, not having a plan doesn't make you any less dangerous, you know? So my thing that Trump reminds me of, I just saw this like 2 weeks in the paper. Like, somewhere in London, they found this unexploded ordnance from World War II from the Blitz in a cellar. And Trump is like that bomb, that unexploded bomb in the basement, It's dangerous, it's historic, it conjures up all kind of things. You don't know how to detonate it necessarily. It's, you just don't know. That's where I'm at with it. And it's sort of amusing,
But these things take a life of their own. Let's remember Clinton. Clinton was investigated for Whitewater. He was impeached because he had sex with an intern. He lied about it. What started this is supposed connections with Russia, which may or may not exist. I'm more agnostic about it than you. I'm agnostic about everything, I guess. But what's going to happen is it's going to move to the direction of him trying to control the investigation, and that's much more damaging.
But Mikhail is asking a very fundamental question, which is, will he be impeached? And consider the political status of the Congress here. I mean, the Republicans basically own both houses.
Yeah, no. I mean, the Republicans have no interest in anything but power, and he would be impeached if they thought suddenly that impeaching them would give them a better chance of election in the next congressional election. That's all they care about. But it's more likely... I think it's
with the Vice President Pence becoming president, they think that would give them more chance?
It would give them... If they felt that he was a liability, they'd take Pence for the moment. And I don't know if I'm allowed to use those words. I personally think Pence is an evil... I use the word that starts with a P, it ends with a K. I'd rather have him than a lunatic. I'd rather have an evil creep than a lunatic. That's my own feeling.
Niki, what do you think?
Well, I think some of the reporting on this whole thing has been a bit hysterical. And so far, we do not know that he has committed any illegal action whatsoever. Morally, he could be guilty as sin. But has he committed a high crime, a misdemeanor? Has he betrayed his country? Has he been guilty of treachery? We don't know any of these things. Even the New York Times at the weekend said this is not Watergate.
Yeah.
Even if it was Watergate, that took 2 years to get Nixon. So this has got a very long way to play out, and I think we don't really know enough of what has been going on.
The shape of it, though, might be about obstruction of justice. If he stopped an investigation into his own team and sacked the FBI director that was leading the investigation, couldn't that go down that path?
It could, but it could take a very long time before we actually establish the facts of these matters. That's what I'm saying.
And the Constitution, by the way, when high crimes and misdemeanors was interpreted, it really meant that you could be inappropriate, you'd act inappropriately for the office. You actually didn't have to commit a crime. You could just be either incompetent or act inappropriately for the presidency. That's what the original clause was there for. So it could be taken back to that. I actually think it's more likely he'll resign.
I'm going to come back to Mikhail, because no one is going to impeach Vladimir Putin for anything that he does. And in actual fact, it looks like he's going to run again next year for president, which means he very likely would be president until 2024. I mean, that's a sort of level of power.
Not 24. If you 21. Oh. Yes, 24.
Sorry. Yes. Yeah. But that's a level of power that you know, kind of. We have to think back to Brezhnev and Stalin and the sort of long-term leaders of the old Soviet Union to start thinking about comparisons.
You know, I think that's a factor of instability for Russia because, yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people seriously are asking question, if not Putin, who can be the president of Russia? There is no one else. And I know it from a lot of sources that after his first presidential term, he didn't want to be re-elected. He didn't want to run for the second term, and he was persuaded, he was nearly made to do that again by his inner circle, mainly by his closest friends, businessmen, and by his top advisors from the intelligence. They wanted to keep him as a guarantee for their business, for their safety, security, and so on.
So are they terrified by the prospect of anyone else becoming president?
As for now, we don't see anybody who can really challenge him during the democratic elections. We have no political process, unfortunately. We have only one popular politician, apart from Mr. Putin, and that the second politician that exists in the country is a very bad role model because his life is terrible. He was sentenced to a couple of terms, not in jail, but he's sentenced. His brother is in jail. He's under constant threat. And looking at that person, Alexei Navalny, everyone in the country knows that you shouldn't enter politics. That's so dangerous. If you want to, if you want to risk your life, your freedom, your family, your reputation, your money, you can go and run and just do anything.
But almost as dangerous as comedy.
Yeah, even more. So the feeling that most active Russians have now that we must wait. One day, President Putin sure is going to be old enough, probably not to run, or he's going to die. Anyway, he is going to die. So probably that's going to be the moment for a political process to
I'm going to bring it,
start
Niki.
again.
Niki, this does make our revolving door prime ministership sound quite attractive by comparison.
Well, I was thinking today we had 6 prime ministers in 8 years, and we're still doing not too badly, really, all things considered. So, despite all the churn and the upheaval, I don't think it's it's going to, you know, lead to the ruin of the United States if Trump goes down and Pence comes in, or
Putin outlives them all.
Goes out.
I mean, you know,
countries
look,
always.
Life goes on.
Life goes on.
But one hopes life goes on, because there's a big difference, however. The United States and Russia have 15,000 nuclear weapons between them, and life could not go on. I mean, it's a real difference. I hate to say it, but that possibility still exists. And unfortunately, if you talk about complacency, I think climate change is much higher in people's minds still than we've been 70 years without using a nuclear weapon, and people forget that each country has 1,000 nuclear weapons on high alert.
Pause that idea, because the idea of life going on or not is actually the subject of our next question. Remember, by the way, you can join the discussion at Q&A Extra on Facebook Live and ABC News Radio straight after this program. That next question comes from Darren Chandler.
When I think of global threats throughout the world, some things that come to mind are Islamic fundamentalism in places like Pakistan and the Middle East, Christian fundamentalism in places like the United States, a meteorite decimating a city, possibly even creating global tsunamis, and climate change. What do you think has the greatest probability to end the greatest story that we know of so far?
Lawrence, keep it brief.
Okay, great. Well, as you know, yeah, I had the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. Every year we move the doomsday clock or think about it, and we run a doomsday symposium. It's not a lot of fun. I still think right now the most urgent pressing concern is nuclear weapons. I think, so if I want to list it, for existential threats, nuclear weapons are still there, and it's something we can do something about. It's something we're not doing anything about. 70 years ago, Einstein said everything has changed save the way we think. We're still thinking the same way. No one is talking about disarmament. The nuclear countries are actually violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty, in my opinion, because not only do we not, I mean, part of it is not having people like North Korea and Iran get nuclear weapons, but part of the treaty is that the countries that have nuclear weapons are supposed to work to disarm. Instead, both the United States and Russia are spending, the United States has a $1 trillion program to modernize nuclear weapons. It's not sending the right message. So I think by far that's the biggest threat. Just to touch two other things you said.
Not two other things, no.
Okay, one other. Okay, nothing. Okay.
I'll come back to you. Let me bring Mona in.
Well, you mentioned the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, which I think is weighing on a lot of people's minds, and I just wanted to kind of provide some statistics on that. It was interesting. There was an incident in New York just before I left to come here, in which a man ran over some pedestrians in Times Square, and the media very quickly lost interest, basically because his name wasn't Mohammed, effectively. And actually, the threat of Islamic fundamentalism, if you want to view it in terms of number of dead bodies, which as awful as it sounds, is the way to kind of make sense of some threats, actually really isn't that present. So if you take the years from 1975, I know you want to come in, from 1975 to 2015, the threat of terrorism in the US is, the chance of being killed by a foreign-born terrorist is 1 in 3.6 million, and the chance of being killed by a foreign-born terrorist who was also a refugee is 1 in 3.6 billion. But all of our perception of threat has been distorted because of the way that risk is presented to us by politicians.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I wrote a piece in the New Yorker saying that, and I got it castigated. It's exactly that. We have this view that it's a huge threat for most Americans, even in almost every country, the likelihood of being killed by a terrorist. The real people who are in danger from Muslim terrorists are in the Muslim countries.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
Not that you're more likely to be killed by a refrigerator in the United States falling on you.
Now, I'll bring in our other panellists. I mean, I suppose if you're a young black American, you're more likely to be killed by a policeman.
Yeah, I mean, I ain't young. You know, the threat is when people stop asking these questions. That's the threat. You know, when you start taking things for granted, thinking, just not listening to why someone's telling you something and being obedient, that's the threat, you know? It's, you know, because it's easy not to ask the questions because it makes life easier. Oh, that's him today, you know. And so that's, for me, the threat, and I think underlies all this stuff.
Don't you think people stop asking questions when they're afraid? And I think that's the point. If you make people afraid, then you have them stop asking questions and and you pick whether it's Russia or immigrants or Islamic fundamentalism. Make them afraid. Goebbels said it. Democracy, dictatorship, doesn't matter. You want people to do what you want them to do, make them afraid.
OK, Mikhail, what are people afraid of in Russia? We can keep it brief. apart from obviously the president and retribution?
I can say that people that all the people are afraid of having no alternative, that they have they cannot participate and they cannot influence their future. I think that's the problem not only for Russia, that's the problem for a lot of countries in the world. And when I was speaking about Russian propaganda, I can tell that it has changed a lot during the last 3 years. And the current main message of Russian propaganda is not that we are the best and that, let's say, America is our enemy. No, the new message is that we're all the same. They are the same dirty bastards as we are. They are as corrupted. All the elections in the world are fraud. All the policemen are brutally killing innocent people. All the politicians are corrupted. Look at Panama Papers. Democracy does not exist. All the liberal values, that's all bullshit. That does not exist. And I think a lot of people in Russia really believe that that's true. There is no point in looking for any alternative. There is no alternative, no other future. And I'm afraid not only Russians believe in that. When we see Trump triumph in America, that's probably that means that a lot of people in the United States do not believe in that democracy, in that liberal values. When a lot of people in Europe are voting for extremists, they are doing that not because of Putin has brainwashed them. No, because they do not believe in progress. There is no progress in which we used to believe in for the decades. Nothing is if nothing is better in the way it should be, it means the model is wrong.
Do you think that's right?
Well, I would just say that perhaps Russia is a bit more homogenous than some of the other countries that you're talking about. I'm sure.
Not.
Okay, homogenous isn't perhaps the right word, but what I would say is that it doesn't make sense necessarily to talk about America in terms of this nation in that respect. Again, the polling, as flawed as it is, shows that non-white Americans supported Obama and non-white Americans don't support Trump. These are two different swathes of the electorate that have two different views about their country.
I'm just going to, we're pretty much out of time. I'm going to throw to Niki. Just reflecting on this from an Australian perspective, I mean, it's a pretty complacent nation by and large. Do you think that these things that really resonate here, I mean, they do for, let's say, One Nation voters who don't feel like they're part of the system, but is it beyond that 10, 15% of the population?
Look, I think all these issues resonate here. We wake up to Trump in the morning. We go to sleep with him at night, God forbid.
God forbid.
Atrocity after atrocity is reported here, so that he has saturation coverage. He takes up all the oxygen. It is very hard for politicians here to try and get a message out above him. And also, I think the other thing from Trump is that he has the ability to reset the agenda in Australia as well. Because if he was to do something even more outrageous than he's already done, something that is really terrifying, enough to frighten the pants off Australians as well, then I think that will change the political dynamics in Australia as well. So we worry about it not just in a global perspective, and there is a lot to worry about there, but we also worry about it in our own little place here too.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Thank you, Niki. Please thank our panellists, Sydney Writers Festival, and our panel, Lawrence Krauss, Niki Savva, Paul Beatty, Mona Chalabi, and Mikhail Zygar. Thank you very much. Now, remember, You can continue the discussion on Q&A Extra with Tracy Holmes and Indian-Australian short story writer Roanna Gonsalves. They're taking talk back and comments on ABC News Radio and Facebook Live as soon as we finish. Now, next Monday, Q&A will mark the 50th anniversary of the 1967 referendum and the 25th anniversary of the Mabo decision. We'll be coming live from the Great Hall of Parliament in Canberra, looking not just at the past but to the future, with Pat Anderson, the co-chair of the Referendum Council, which is canvassing new changes to the Constitution, Council member and University of New South Wales Professor Megan Davis, the founder of the Cape York Partnership, Noel Pearson, young Indigenous performer and writer Niki Louis. Until next week, good night.
Still got something to say? Join the discussion on Q&A Extra